Welcome to the Life of Hair. My name's James Atkinson. Thank you for choosing to join into this week's episode. Now, this week's episode is another very, very simple but effective money piece highlighting technique that I seem to have seen an insurgence of recently. Now, my lovely lady hadn't had her hair coloured for a little while, so it was definitely due a little refresh. So I started just above the occipital bone in the back, took a horizontal section and used a medium weave. Now, for a lot of people who might be wondering what bleach that is, it is Charcolite. I was fortunate enough to be sent some recently as I'm making a very comprehensive video about who makes the best bleaches on the market. And so I have gone to a lot of trouble to acquire or buy as many of the bleaches that I could possibly find on the market, and I'll definitely be making that video very, very soon. So I've got some very comprehensive and interesting results for you guys to see. So the technique is incredibly simple, and I like to keep things simple. If you watch the channel regularly, you will know that everything that I do is about simplicity and it being an effective technique in the most simplistic way possible. So horizontal sections are always best for maximum coverage. So the least amount of foils for the most amount of impact. Now, one of the things you'll note is that I am not that fastidious about putting foils too close together. You do not need to pack in your foils to get high impact results. You can see here that I've put two in and then one in the center that covers a bit like a brickwork formation. Then I'll repeat this process as I travel up through this back section. This gives me maximum coverage with the minimum amount of effort. And that's not to say that that is cutting corners. That is just working smart, not working hard. You're saving yourself product, foil, you name it, you're saving it, and you are getting a fantastic result in the first place. So always use horizontal sections if you're looking for maximum coverage. The back sections and the side sections are a great place to use horizontal foils. Now in the side, I generally use a diagonal section, but that's just to increase the softness. But that diagonal section does also give decent coverage as well as giving you that extra softness, because all diagonals create a optical illusion of drawing the eye across the shape, and that makes you feel like the whole thing is a lot softer. So diagonals are always really, really useful for that. And we'll talk about that in just a second, but as you can see, I've used this brickwork formation in the back here, and it works an absolute treat. Now, as we travel through this technique and we come onto the side panels, my lovely lady has recently had a little one, and she's got some of that classic very, very fine hair around the front hairline that is from the hormones, and I'm not going to avoid it, just because it's very short. She doesn't want to draw any attention to it, but what I will do is I will make sure that I'll use a lower volume around this front hairline, because that hair is extra fine and extra weak. So you might want to drop your volume, whatever you're using. I'm using 20 volume on the rest of this hair. I drop down to 10 volume on these front hairline sections, just to make sure that I didn't end up with any extra damage to that hair at the front hairline. Simple technique here. We are creating a kind of band of blonde around the front that's quite strong. So those first two sections at the front there, I've got very, very small gaps in between. I don't want the money piece to be really, really chunky on the sides. We're going for more chunkiness through the front section, and you'll see that in the finished look. But once we get past those front two sections, we're then into our subsequent sections, which are all about 1 centimetre apart, like we did in the back. Technique for foiling is, as always, diagonals through the sides here. We will be travelling horizontally through the top section, and I'll talk to you about the dangers of travelling horizontally through the top section when I get there, because there are some things to definitely think about when we are using horizontal sections through a parting. But anyway, we're on the sides, so let's not worry about that for a second, and hang on, and I'll explain a little more in just a second. Saturation is always the king, guys, to the best lift. in this particular instance, we did not even have to tone the end result, and it is beautiful and clean. One of the joys of this Charcoalite bleach is that it does slightly tone the hair for you as you work, which is pretty good actually in a lot of instances, especially if you're just looking for a nice clean blonde without the need for extensive toning work afterwards. You get great lift from it as well. I will be including it as I talk about the bleaches that I discovered, even though it is actually not in the category of bleaches, and I'll explain more. That's a little cryptic, I appreciate, but I specifically picked a certain category of bleaches that I think are the only ones worth using. Anyway, back to today's technique. As you see, as we travel up here, again, we're not overly focusing on hitting every single piece of hair on the head. It's not important to hit every single piece of hair on the head, I believe, unless you're going for a change in foil. And I think a lot of the time we can get lured into doing colour changes in foil, and we can have clients that think that that's the best way, and we pack in hundreds and hundreds of foils and we create a colour change. And to be honest, it's just an enormous waste of time, effort and energy for most people. There are some people who that is what you have to do, but for most people, they don't actually want that level of maintenance. They just think that is what it is needed for their hair to look a certain way. And actually, you can look nice and blonde without going to all of the trouble of having those enormous back-to-back, no separation in between the foil techniques that I really never entertain these days. Now, when we're coming onto this money piece section at the front, we've got two sections that are back to back. So there's no gaps in between these two sections. And obviously that's to emphasize the front sections. She's still got that baby hair around the front hairline, and we just have to include that. Otherwise it would look a bit random. We've got our third section. We are weaving our third section, and we are making sure that this third section, though, is right up against the first two foils. So we're going to get a really nice, strong, bold money piece, but it's not going to be like a really, really thick stripe, because we've got those first two very, very fine slices, and then we've gone in with a weaved section for our third section. When we're going to then subsequently move on to the next section, actually what happened was we decided that actually it wanted to be a chunky money piece. So we weren't going to put this fourth section in, but as you can see, I've double weaved the section. So I weaved a section, and then I weaved the second section, and then I've got the sliver in the middle. And that's a mega fine section, as you can see from the video. It's really, really important to make sure that if you're going to do one further back, it's got to be absolutely seamless, because it's at this point on the head where it's very round, it can start to look very, very chunky indeed. We're on to our fifth one now, and we've got to make sure that there's a gap now of around 5 to 7 millimeters or so between the first four foils that created our money piece and our subsequent foils. And the reason for that is we need contrast, e.g. dark hair, to really emphasize the fact that we created a money piece. Now, once we've done that first one, we can move on to maybe even 1 centimeter sections, as you can see I'm doing here in this particular instance. And I always think that if you're going to go mega fine with your sections, it is quite important to slice off the top of your section first and then weave your section. It prevents you digging into the sections and creating deeper weaves than necessary for the technique. So do bear that in mind. It is really, really, really important. And I'm not going to change a thing at this point. I'm going to work horizontally all the way through to the crown area. Now, what I was saying about working horizontally through the top of the head like this, and it's very common, you can end up with a stripe. If you think about the logic of this particular section, we are taking a horizontal section in a piece of hair that is going to be sectioned vertically down the head. So we can easily create stripes if we're not very careful with this particular technique or using a horizontal section through a parting. So the way to best avoid it is to make sure your sections are super fine. Here's the finished result, and as you can see, we've got that money piece, and what's really important is to look just behind the money piece where you can see the dark piece of hair that separates and defines the money piece from the rest of the hair. Now, we didn't do some miraculous big blow dry. I wanted you just to see it as it was. My lady had to get going because she had to take her baby home. But I really, really like to leave that little bit of contrast in there. I really think it's what separates it from being a set of highlights that kind of gradually get further and further apart to something that is most definitely a strong money piece, but in my eyes still have a nice little bit of softness too. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, then please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Loads of content here on The Life of Hair, and I'll see you again very, very soon.